Welcome to Business Reporter's Best of British Business campaign. I'm Rachel Hicks. Short-term letting has been on the rise in the UK over recent years, thanks to a booming tourism industry and the proliferation of sophisticated online booking services. However, increasing regulatory pressure and the COVID-19 pandemic have forced the sector to a halt in 2020. But our studio guests claim that tourism is not the only way landlords can make short-term lets profitable, and that the upcoming reforms to promote responsible hosting can also ensure the long-term sustainability of the sector. Today we're talking to Akash Sharda and Tala Bashir from SpotHost. Good morning, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rachel.
Hello. Now, the short-term lets market saw a huge boom for 3 years and then pretty much ground to a halt, in some places reversed. What happened?
Well, quite simply put, there are no tourists anymore, and we rely heavily on the tourists to make up the short-term market. We don't know when this market will return, and therefore we're now having to look at other avenues or other ways to still generate that level of income that our clients and landlords are used to.
And to add to what Akash has said, there are logistical challenges when you're managing a short let, and a service provider like ourselves can help from that end as well.
And to what extent would you say that COVID-19 has affected short lets as well?
It's had a significant impact on us. As I mentioned, the travel industry is on its knees. Because of that, and local restrictions in place by the government has led to little or no income for our landlords.
Now, Scotland is preparing to hand more power to local councils to regulate short lets. Will that be seen as a deterrent or a welcome reform for landlords?
It definitely would be a deterrent. In its current shape or form, Rachel, the local authorities having the power would create many different variations of the same rules and guidelines. The idea from the start was that any legislation which would be proposed would be done on a national level, and that would lead to a more consistent and fairer rules for everyone to follow across Scotland.
So in that case, how prepared would you say are hosts and landlords for the coming changes?
Not very well prepared at all. The reason being is that the government is taking a checklist approach, and this checklist seems to be very complicated in its current shape. To give you an example, one of the items in the checklist is that if you've got hardwood flooring in your home, that would be required to change into vinyl or carpet, reason being so you don't disturb your downstairs neighbours. Now, if you're a landlord who's only renting out for a couple of weeks in a year or potentially a couple of months, looking at it from the cost point of view, that would not be justified for them. So this would completely put them off, and it would be unfair for them not to generate some sort of income while they're away from the property.
So it's a bit of a blunt instrument, this checklist that's being used.
Absolutely, it's definitely onerous. It's like cracking a nut with a hammer. It's just not needed.
Given all the uncertainties in the market at the moment, wouldn't it be understandable if landlords just went back to using traditional letting agents and took on long-term tenants?
Well, long-term tenants and long-term letting in general has its own drawbacks, and unfortunately this model is very different to the short let model. There is a lot more regulation involved in the long-term in the long-term letting side of things, but more importantly, it's not actually applicable to all landlords. When you find a long-term tenant, there is no guarantee of when this tenant may leave or for how long they may stay for. When you're doing short-term, you have a check-in and a check-out date. It's almost like staying at a hotel. You know when you're coming in and you know when you're leaving, giving you a lot more control over your property and allowing you to potentially generate that much more extra money from a nightly rental in comparison to having a long-term tenant.
So in that case, how do you help landlords with short-term lets, and how does your solution differ from everything else out there?
We help the landlords by providing a low-cost service, which is good value for their money. But more importantly, our industry is changing constantly right now. So we help them by making sure they are complying with the legislation and any rules that they need to follow, and bring them up to speed for any changes that are coming forward.
So tourism is in the doldrums at the moment. Are there other ways to make a short-term let profitable at the moment?
Absolutely, there is. We at SpotHost specialise in what you would call a blended yield model. A blended yield model is where you would maximise on the opportunities coming from short, mid and long term. To give you an example, you can have a contractor, which could be a businessman to an academic to a construction worker, who could potentially stay in your properties for 6 months, and then when there's void periods, you can fill that in with the tourists.
By using this blended yield model, we're able to look at other markets and use these contractors to come in and fill that in, or potentially even long-term tenants, i.e. students that may use it for a couple of months or so whilst they're at university, etc. But by using this sort of model, it allows us to maximise the revenue that we can generate for our landlords without tourists being existent.
Is that a realistic model? I mean, what a student wants from an apartment, what a building contractor might want from an apartment, and what a holidaymaker might want from an apartment, it's three different things though, isn't it?
We provide fully furnished service apartments, and the three groups of people that you've mentioned are all looking at a place to stay, a private place, a place to cook, and a service accommodation provided for them. So yes, it does tick all those boxes for these people.
So what are SpotHost's plans for the future, and how do you see the current market changing over the next, say, 5 to 10 years?
I think the market's definitely going to come back, and once it does, as we've seen in the past, back in 9/11 when it happened, and then in 2008 the recession, the travel and tourism industry was impacted massively. But what we did see is that this industry bounced back far quicker and stronger than any other industry, and when that happens, it will allow SpotHost to continue to grow as we have done for the last 3 years, and we are looking to tap both nationally, internationally with our business model. Whilst that's all happening, we'd want to work with our association and policyholders to make sure that we promote responsible hosting.
Gentlemen, thank you for coming in and talking to us today.
Thank you, Rachel.